Back in 2015, investors valued Theranos at $9 billion. Its founder, Elizabeth Holmes, was celebrated as the youngest self-made female billionaire in America. Former secretaries of state sat on the board. Generals, senators and billionaires defended the company publicly. Pharmacies, were preparing to roll out its technology nationwide. There was only one problem. The technology, it barely worked. And inside Silicon Valley, almost nobody wanted to admit it. Because Theranos was never just a healthcare company. It became something far more powerful. A story investors desperately wanted to believe. A story about disruption, about genius, about changing the world. And in modern markets, stories can become more valuable than reality itself. By the time the collapse finally came, patients had received unreliable blood test results. Hundreds of millions of dollars had disappeared. Careers were destroyed. Federal investigations began circling the company. And Silicon Valley was, forced to confront a terrifying possibility. Its entire system had rewarded deception. The strange part is that Theranos didn't fool Silicon Valley by breaking the rules. It fooled Silicon Valley by understanding them perfectly. Elizabeth Holmes arrived in Silicon Valley at the exact moment the culture was obsessed with founders who looked, impossible to stop. The mythology was already established by companies like Apple, Facebook, and Tesla. Young visionaries were no longer seen as risky. They were treated like prophets. Holmes studied that psychology carefully. She dropped out of Stanford University at 19. She wore black turtlenecks modeled after Steve Jobs. She even deepened her voice. She spoke in controlled philosophical language about transforming healthcare for humanity. Investors didn't just see a startup founder. They saw a familiar archetype. And archetypes are dangerous because, people stop questioning them. Theranos promised something almost absurdly ambitious. Hundreds of blood tests, using only a few drops of blood from a finger prick. No needles, faster results, lower costs, a revolution in diagnostics. If it worked, it would destroy enormous sections of the traditional blood testing industry, dominated by companies like Quest Diagnostics and LabCorp. That possibility alone created enormous investor pressure. In Silicon Valley, missing the next billion-dollar company can be more psychologically painful than, actually losing money. Venture capital firms survive on finding outliers. One massive success can erase 10 failures. That incentive structure quietly changes investor behavior, People become afraid of skepticism, and Theranos weaponized that fear. The company operated with extreme secrecy. Employees worked in isolated teams. Departments barely communicated. Former workers later described an atmosphere of surveillance and intimidation. Legal threats became routine. Holmes and company president Sunny Balwani cultivated an internal culture where questioning leadership could end careers instantly. But paradoxically, the secrecy increased investor interest. Scarcity creates perceived value. The less outsiders understood the company, the more sophisticated it appeared. Investors interpreted silence as evidence of groundbreaking intellectual property instead of operational dysfunction. Then came the board. This was honestly one of the most strategically brilliant parts of the Theranos operation. The board included former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State George Shultz, former Defense Secretary James Mattis, and, well, other powerful political figures. Notice something strange here? Very few had deep expertise in laboratory diagnostics. That wasn't accidental. Theranos didn't build a board optimized for scientific oversight. Instead, it built a board optimized for credibility, influence, and frankly, protection. The message to investors was simple. If these people trust the company, why shouldn't you? Authority bias took over. And once elite reputations became attached to Theranos, challenging the company became, well, socially difficult. Nobody wanted to be the person claiming that America's most respected leaders had been manipulated by a young founder in a black turtleneck. The valuation exploded anyway. By 2014, Theranos had raised roughly $700 million from investors, including media mogul Rupert Murdoch and powerful families like the Waltons. At its peak, Holmes owned about half the company on paper, creating a personal fortune, estimated around $4.5 billion. But internally, the technology was failing repeatedly. Machines produced inconsistent results. Accuracy problems kept emerging. Many tests were secretly being run on traditional commercial analyzers, while Theranos publicly implied its own devices handled the work. This was the moment where the company crossed from optimism into deception. But, you know, Silicon Valley often struggles to identify that line, because startup culture kind of normalizes exaggeration. Founders are expected to sell the vision. Venture capital rewards confidence, speed, and narrative dominance. In moderation, that mindset can build transformative companies. In excess, it creates environments where fraud can hide inside ambition. The media amplified the illusion. Major publications celebrated Holmes as the future of healthcare. Magazine covers transformed her into a symbol of innovation itself. Few journalists had the technical expertise to deeply investigate the science. And honestly, access journalism created another problem. Media organizations benefited from proximity to powerful founders. Critical reporting risked losing that access. Then, well, one reporter ignored the pressure. In 2015, John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal began investigating Theranos after receiving tips from former employees. What followed became, honestly, one of the most important pieces of investigative journalism in modern business history. Theranos attacked aggressively. Lawyers threatened sources, executives denied allegations. Holmes personally tried to contain the damage. But the deeper Carreyrou investigated, the clearer the reality became. The company's core claims were collapsing under scrutiny. And suddenly, Silicon Valley's confidence machine reversed direction. That reversal was brutal because, you know, market narratives work both ways. The same psychology that inflates companies can destroy them. Partners disappeared. Regulators intervened. The US Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes and Balwani with massive fraud. Theranos dissolved in 2018. Years later, Holmes was convicted on multiple fraud charges. But, you know, the real story is larger than just one founder. Theranos exposed a structural weakness inside modern capitalism. When markets become obsessed with disruption, charisma can begin replacing verification. Investors stop demanding proof because, well, speed matters more than certainty. Media outlets reward compelling narratives over technical complexity. And powerful people protect founders because their own reputations become financially and psychologically attached to the myth. And once enough influential people believe the same story, dissent starts looking irrational. That is how Theranos fooled Silicon Valley. Not through magic, not through genius deception alone, but through a system that increasingly rewarded narrative over reality. The most unsettling lesson is that Silicon Valley still runs on many of the same incentives today. Founders continue selling futures that may never arrive. Investors still fear missing the next empire. And, well, markets still reward confidence faster than truth. Theranos collapsed because eventually biology refused to cooperate with storytelling. Reality always collects its debt. Subscribe to Money Cartel. Because the people who understand power are usually the ones least likely to be controlled by it.